Broadcasting live from the Hall of the Storm Giants in the Forgotten Realms, this is Tap Tap Concede. Welcome everybody to Tap Tap Concede. My name is Graham, and joining me is Cameron and Jeremy Petter.
Hello. Hey, where am I? Gosh, I thought I was coming to the moon or something, but apparently we're in the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, so last week I introduced us as being from, I think of Den of the Bugbear or whatever, on the prime material plane. And because I'd previously said that it was the plane of Faerun, and I was corrected that Faerun was the continent and the prime material plane was the plane. And last time people were like, well, you could probably just say Toril, like the world, because like that sort of works. And I've just given up. It's like, no, it's in the Forgotten Realms.
The book says the Forgotten Realms. I'm calling it the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, exactly.
Until you can figure out your own cosmology.
I think there's a good number of books that would back you up on that.
I think so too.
The covers of like half the fantasy section in your average bookstore, I think, would back you up on it being the Forgotten Realms trademark.
Coming to you from the plane of Dragonlance.
Okay, that's not, yeah.
Oh no, I'm perfectly happy just rolling with it. It's what the book says. It's what I'm calling it.
If you're wondering who exactly Jeremy Petter is and why he is here, we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, we're going to remind you that this show is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Please check out cardkingdom.com/LRR. Order yourself some Adventures in the Forgotten Realms because it's super fun. At least I think so. And of course, this show and everything we do is brought to you by you and your kind support of our Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. And we thank you very much for it. Now, of course, folks who've been listening to us for some time will, maybe balk at the notion that someone might not know who Jeremy Petter is. But Jeremy hasn't been regular with LRR in some time now, though you have been on Dice Friends fairly recently, if we're being honest. Yeah.
We crossed a threshold recently where it's now been longer since I was full-time with Lure than I was full-time with Lure. So it has been a while, but I mean, obviously I have known most of these people for quite a long time. It is not incorrect to say that a lot of the friendships that led to a lot of folks appearing in some of the original Loading Ready Run videos, myself, James, Matt, etc., were sort of founded in D&D games that we played in high school.
You and I were in a theater class, and we'd been aware of one another prior to that, and then we were in this drama class in high school, and you were like, have you heard of D&D? I was like, I think so. And you were like, cool, you should come over to my friend Bill's place and play in this D&D game that we're doing. And that was how I met, Bill, Morgan, James, etc.
It's not a mistake to say that when I got bit by the D&D bug in high school, I fell for it hard, and I was a huge evangelist for Dungeons and Dragons and our campaign. And so I would aggressively try to recruit my friends to play with us. And we went through a period where suddenly we had a few sort of openings in the table come up all at the same time. And so that was when I know that I aggressively tried to recruit you and James, and Morgan was already involved. He already knew Bill. But yeah.
There was a period of time where you were running, I want to say, maybe I'm conflating a couple things, but I know that there was a period of time where there was several different campaigns running at once, because this was in high school when we had time to do this. And Bill was running a Forgotten Realms campaign. You were running, I want to say it was either Ravenloft or Dark Sun at that point. James was DMing Dragonlance.
So Morgan ran Dark Sun. I ran Ravenloft. Primarily, I read all the Ravenloft books, but I primarily ran the 19th century Earth Ravenloft spin-off called Mask of the Red Death.
Right.
James ran Birthright. Bill's primary campaign for a long time was the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign, which I believe was set in Greyhawk, but he may have transposed it onto the Forgotten Realms.
I forgot that Greyhawk was its own place. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the correct mode with which to engage with Greyhawk, I feel.
I mean, Greyhawk is sort of, it is sort of Defaultsville, or at least it kind of goes in and out of that mode. For 3rd edition, it was the default setting for D&D, and it is basically the remnants of the original Gygax, Aronson kind of campaigns, and all the adventures that came out of that and whatnot, just sort of smudged into one campaign setting as if it were a cohesive whole.
Mhm.
So yeah, and then you were the one who ran a campaign that was like definitively set in the Forgotten Realms with the Haunted Halls of Evening Star
Oh
briefly.
yeah, forgot about that.
Yeah, but so yeah, we sort of assigned, because this was the 90s slash early 2000s, and second edition was still the going mode. The way that second edition worked is TSR at the time was trying to support multiple campaign settings simultaneously. And so if you can imagine like Wizards now putting out, like right now we get a Ravnica set like every whatever 3 years, and Innistrad set, or sets every 3 years. If you can imagine them like doing like trying to do Ravnica on like every January, like a Ravnica set every like January and April, and then a Theros set every February and May, and an Innistrad set every
Good lord.
March and June. Like that's how products worked in second edition D&D. It was just all these different worlds, and they were trying to release content for them all simultaneously. And so we took that as a mandate that each of us could like own one of these settings. And so yeah, anyway, obviously I am here to talk about Dungeons and Dragons today.
Yeah, I realized we didn't actually address sort of like the thesis of the episode is that this Magic the Gathering set, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, has a lot of it's not even references, right? It's not like, oh, it has a subtle reference to this particular thing. There's they've taken Dungeons and Dragons and they put it into Magic the Gathering, and we wanted to talk a bit, for those of you who may not be as familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, about sort of where that comes from. This is, I guess, akin to when we do like the mythical origins episodes. It's sort of like, what inspired the thing that you're seeing on these Magic cards. Jared's going to be joining us for this week, and then next week Shivam will be here as well. And Shivan's going to talk a little bit about some of the legendary creatures in the set and the legendary characters that they are in D&D. But this week we're going to talk a little bit in more sort of generalities and kind of like the overall flavor, and cards that we really like from a flavor perspective and how they translated from D&D, and some that we don't as well. But Jared, you wanted to start off by sort of talking about how D&D and Magic have been influencing each other for some time now. Even, I would say, even before Wizards of the Coast like bought TSR.
Like since there was a Magic the Gathering, I don't think there's a question, right? Since there was a Magic the Gathering, D&D has influenced Magic. There, like if you look at Alpha, there are so many cards that just directly evoke elements of Dungeons and Dragons. For example, Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt is like an iconic spell in Dungeons and Dragons. You get it it's a third level wizard spell. That means you get it at fifth level, and it creates a
I've always hated that.
yeah. D&D is weird. It creates a bolt of lightning that comes out of your hands and blasts everything within, depending on the edition, like a 5 or 10-foot line emanating from you. And then in more fun versions of D&D, I shouldn't say more fun versions. They go back and forth on some of this, but lightning bolt is sort of a symmetrical mechanic in some ways, in that in some versions of D&D it bounces off walls. So if you like arc it at a 45-degree angle, it will bounce off a wall and hit other creatures, or
Neat.
potentially you and your party. And so this anyway, very iconic Dungeons and Dragons spell. One of the best damage dealing spells that you can get, becomes a very iconic damage dealing spell in Magic the Gathering. And a lot of other aspects carry directly over from D&D. Again, Alpha had Sedge Troll, which is a red creature that regenerates for a black mana cost that might involve other mana. Again, you've got regenerating trolls. That is something that comes from D&D, or at least by way of D&D from other literature. I am pretty sure the regenerating troll comes from a specific piece of literature that D&D supposed co-creator Gary Gygax lifted it from, called, I think, 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, but I could be wrong about the number of hearts and or lions. but yeah, so like these tropes originate from D&D, they find their way into Magic, and they've been sort of germinating through Magic for a long time. And I think that's super been super influential on the game.
Yeah. And I recall when, I mean, I was only vaguely aware of this at the time because I wasn't as hard into Magic the Gathering as I am now. But I know that when Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, the company that originally published D&D, because they were in a bad state, having been trying, as you said, having been trying to, just spread themselves too thin, among other things, that as soon as Wizards bought them, people were like, oh, there's going to be, the Magic D&D sort of mashup and crossover. And it took a while for that to happen officially.
It did. I think that Magic spoke a lot to D&D, or D&D took a lot from Magic over that time. And the biggest part of that, I think, was templating. So in Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition, which came out, so Wizards bought D&D in like around 2000. I actually think it might have been earlier than that. It might have been 1998, 99. Wizards of the Coast bought Wizards of the Coast bought D&D, and they pretty quickly started working on a 3rd edition of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And people, even at the time, were like, oh, they're going to make us play D&D with cards, and they're gonna ruin it.
Right.
I remember being at a convention at some point, and someone was like, all they need to do is just like fix the typos in 2nd edition, and it's gold. They don't need to touch anything. People were worried about it, and rightfully so, because Wizards actually did change quite a bit. But as it turned out, those changes were predominantly very good. And the biggest thing that Wizards had learned from Magic at the time, from a school of hard knocks with like Alpha and Arabian Nights and Antiquities and whatnot, is that templating is really important. You've got to be able to write your abilities in sort of an exceptions-based rules system in a way that is clear and makes clear what base rules your exceptions are overriding, and make sure that they're the same every time. And so in 3rd edition, you started to see very clear templating on monster descriptions, spells, feats, etc. And so you would have, for example, a wolf in D&D has an ability called Trip, and it was actually keyworded as Trip. And if you ever saw another creature with Trip, its ability would function similarly. It would not actually function exactly the same, but it would be easy enough for you to say, okay, well, this thing trips and this thing trips. They do different amounts of damage, but mechanically they do the same thing. And that's something that D&D hadn't had before. It made running the game a lot easier. It also made like portability of rules between like characters and monsters a lot easier, because you could say, well, this character class can do this and this monster can do this, and it's the same. So that's really good. Another thing that Magic brought to D&D in 3rd edition, and really sort of reached its kind of zenith in 4th edition, was this sort of like concept of builds and like assembly of your character from component parts. And part of the philosophy of 3rd edition was that you could have these interchangeable parts like feats that you could like add to your character, like building a deck, and that those feats didn't necessarily need to be created equal like Magic cards. So I remember being in like grade 5 or whatever, and learning about Magic and being like, all the cards are equal. It doesn't matter. It's just what you put in your deck. And now we know that was never the intent, and that was never the intent with the feats in Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition, and some of the powers in Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. Some of the spells and feats and powers were designed such that you would learn to not use those things, or to use certain things in combination, and you could feel mastery of the system in the game in a way that wasn't possible in previous editions. And I think a lot of people would say that they probably went too far with that between 3rd and 4th edition, which brought us back to 5th edition, which is the current version of D&D. And it strikes a nice balance of that kind of stuff, where you can still assemble a build and put whatever abilities and stuff you want to in your character, and feel like you're constructing something that is uniquely your own, which again, it comes from the same place as constructing a Magic deck that is, or a Commander deck or whatever, that is exactly like what you want to build and focused around your interests. But so it retains that without being super mechanics driven and super crunchy, and without like, you don't want to get to a point where you're like publishing a book that has say even 2 pages of content that is taken up by stuff that is not powerful enough to see regular use. That's not you don't want to charge someone money for that book. So yeah, they've learned a lot, and I think they've come a long way.
Yeah, I think so too. I have very much enjoyed what I enjoy in particular about 5th edition is that it's the one that I've found easiest to pick up for people who haven't played the previous editions, like 3 and 3.5 had a lot of there was a lot of momentum from the previous editions. Like they did fix a lot of stuff, but there was still like, just sort of, I don't know. I feel like you can explain 5th edition and its mechanics to a brand new player a lot more easily, which I think is, to the benefit of the game.
I would say that coming from 2nd edition, like 3rd edition was a big mechanical upgrade, but you're right. Like I think you can just end that sentence with like 3rd edition had a lot, period, full stop. There was a lot there. And they tried to simplify it with 4th edition, but they did a bunch of other stuff in 4th edition that people did not like. Anyway, so bypassing talking about D&D editions too much, Magic and D&D have been in a conversation for a very long time, and it's really cool to see that conversation sort of reach a point where they are now in like a direct dialogue in this set. So we have cards in this set that are like other takes on stuff that was tried in alpha, and but more flavorful takes. So like here we have a troll that instead of like just having a regeneration ability that stops it from dying, can actually like come back from your graveyard in over some span of time. We have a healing potion that doesn't suck, like the healing salve. I mean, like I'm not saying it's great, but it's not healing salve. And we have like new takes on the elementals. We have the earth cult elemental, and there's another cult elemental. Is it air or water or something?
Air, yeah.
It's the air cult elemental. There's an earth elemental in alpha and an air elemental in alpha, but these ones are so much more flavorful and interesting than those versions, and really do a lot to evoke Dungeons and Dragons. And so I'm really excited that we've got this sort of like second take on that, and that we get to see all these things as Magic and D&D come together.
Yeah, absolutely. So you asked us also to sort of collate some cards that we thought were particularly flavor wins and or whiffs to talk about. Did you have any that you wanted to start with?
Well, I can start us off with one. Okay, so I just figured that this would be a good way for us to, because there's so much in this set. This set is so overflowing with D&D flavor and references that it's very difficult to think about like going through all the different cards and saying like, okay, well, this is what this is. And that wouldn't be very interesting anyway. So I just figured that we should talk about stuff that we're excited about. And some of that's going to be different for each of us. First, Farita's Fireball, actually, I think is a really great and flavorful design. It has a design that to me evokes the Fireball from Dungeons and Dragons. So Alpha had a Fireball as well. Alpha's Fireball is like, it's this card that is kind of bizarre when you look at it. It's an X spell, but you can like also pay extra mana to have it target additional things, but then you have to split the damage evenly between those things, and it's never seemed intuitive. It's a lot more intuitive when you think about it as being an interpretation of D&D's Fireball. The way D&D's Fireball works is it's a burst damage spell that makes an explosion in a sphere, and anything inside that sphere takes a whole bunch of damage. The problem with Fireball is that you've got to position it properly. Like oftentimes your adventuring party will be having a big fight, and maybe the wizard and the archer will be in the back, and there will be like a fighter and a rogue in the front, and so they'll be in melee with the enemies and having a big old brawl, and then the wizard's going to want to drop that fireball in, and they're going to try and hit as many baddies as they can with it. And so the alpha fireball really captures that. It's like, okay, well, if you position the fireball like this, you can hit one enemy, but if you position it like this, maybe you can hit 2 or 3. What it doesn't get is that the problem with Fireball, especially in some editions, Fireball also gets bigger. So it like starts as a 30-foot radius and gets like 40 feet, 50 feet, 60 feet as you get higher level. What it doesn't capture is that sometimes it's really hard to hit the bad guys without hitting the good guys too. And I like that this version of Fireball is like, well, sometimes you can position it to hit the things that you want to hit. Sometimes you're going to take some damage too, and you're going to live with it. So I think that's a really cool way of evoking the classic D&D Fireball, and it put a smile on my face when I read it.
That's good. I like that a lot. I hadn't even totally considered that's exactly what this is doing. And I think it's gotten better in D&D that now wizards have like, I don't remember the term for it, but it's like at like 3rd level or something, there's like a selective, you can like cast a thing but have it not affect some number of friendly people as chosen by you. But I definitely remember when we were playing those old games doing like the Temple of Elemental Evil game, that it was like, well, I'm going to do this fireball, but someone's going to get singed.
Yeah. And I mean, well, definite feel bad when you kill the rogue accidentally because they whiff their saving throw after you positioned a fireball on them thinking they'd be fine. That's not a good feeling, but it leads to good stories. Cameron, do you have any particular flavor wins that you wanted to call out in the set?
The cards that I wanted to talk about were the class cards, like as just a general idea, but I think they're actually interesting to talk about in relationship with each other, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, you can multi-class in Magic.
Yeah. And Melissa DeTora wrote an article on the mothership, I guess, called Every Adventurer Needs a Class, where she talks a bit about like the rationale behind designing these cards and what they wanted them to achieve and how they gave them the abilities. And that's a very informative article. Go and read it if this interests you. The two cards I want to talk about are Sorcerer class and Wizard class, because if you've ever played D&D, there are two major arcane spellcasters, bards and warlocks. Just give me this one. Give me this one. You have sorcerers who are spontaneous spellcasters and wizards who use Vancian magic, which is you have to prepare a spell and then you cast it and it expends the spell. And that's the TLDR between the two classes, right? Sorcerers lose a lot of breadth but gain flexibility, whereas wizards are inflexible but have an enormous library of spells, which I think is a much clearer way of thinking about it, right? So when you look at wizard class, which is a 1 blue enchantment, the first thing that it does is say you have no maximum hand size. You can then level it up twice. At level 2, it says when this class becomes level 2, draw 2 cards. And at level 3, it says whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So what that's doing is that it's building up the wizard's library, right? Their hand, their breadth of accessible spells, right? You still have to have the correct ones in your deck in order to do anything useful, but you do have a lot more choice compared to the sorcerer, which is a 1 blue, 1 red enchantment with 3 levels. The first one says when sorcerer class enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. So already we're looking at how the sorcerer gives up a lot of breadth to have the accessible what they need right away, right? Like this is card disadvantage in card selection. Level 2, it says creatures you control have tap, add blue or red. Spend this mana only to cast instant or sorcery spells or gain a class level. Interesting. Okay. And then at 3rd level, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, that spell deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of instant and sorcery spells you've cast this turn. So Sorcerer is encouraging you to cast a lot, right? It wants the throughput rather than the breadth. And I think those are useful ways of examining what those classes want to do without making the wizard, giving the wizard the ability to cast haste at level 3, right?
I also like from the flavor perspective of the wizard class, you have no maximum hand size is like you have access to all the spells. You just don't have them all written down in your spell book for the day, but you have access to all of them. And then you draw 2 cards and it's like, okay, those are the spells you've written down. Those are the spells you've prepared this rest.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. I think these 2 cards help me contextualize what I'm thinking about when I try to decide, do I want to play a sorcerer? Do I want to play a wizard? And then I realize, of course, that I said, wizard doesn't make the wizard take haste as the example spell. And I realized looking at its level 3, whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. That's kind of like the D&D haste spell.
This wizard goes pretty hard into buffs, I think, at 3rd level.
Yeah. This is definitely in transmutation. Full strength was transmutation.
Yeah.
You use extended spell to cast Cat's Grace on yourself every morning. You have it up for 8 hours.
I really enjoy these cards too. I spent some time sort of comparing them in my mind and trying to figure out which one I liked the best. Because I mean the wizard going into buffing magic at 3rd level, I was kind of like, seems a little more cleric-y. I don't know. The sorcerer being like the lots of spell throughput, I think is a really great read. And of course, sorcerers, while they have more limited spells, I think that they actually have more spells per day than the wizard does. So I think that makes sense as a theme. I think there's some other great cards that evoke the classes in really neat ways. Just to sort of play off what Cam's talking about, I think my favorite one is, what's it called? The choose your weapon, where you get to choose between 2-weapon style and archery, which is outside the ranger class card, which does different things. Everything to do with rangers in this set involves animal companions, but it is a trait of the ranger class in Dungeons and Dragons, where you choose at first level whether you want to be a 2-sword ranger or a bow ranger, and that's something that has transcended multiple versions of D&D. You can choose to emulate Aragorn in one of those 2 ways, and that's a way that you can choose.
In a similar vein, one of the cards, actually, I mean, a cycle of cards, much like the classes, that I love from the perspective of evoking playing a game of D&D is the party cards. There's a bunch of them. It's, there's more than 5. It's a big cycle, but it's the ones like you hear something on watch, you meet in a tavern. That one in particular, I mean, for those who aren't aware, that is itself just like a trope of D&D campaigns, to the point that it is such a, like a cliche now of just, okay, I'm the DM. We have these 4 party members. These characters don't know each other. We start the adventure, session 1 of the campaign. You meet in a tavern. You're meeting each other for the first time. And the things that I like about these, so one is it's the same party on every one of these cards. And these party members are cards in the set. It's Varys, the ranger, Gretchen Titchwellow, the halfling druid, Hama Pashar, the human wizard, and Nalar, the dragonborn paladin. And those characters, they're legendary creatures in this set. Those are not established D&D characters. In fact, their names are from the player's handbook table of suggested names for that kind of race and class of character.
It's incredible detail.
I love it. And so every one of these is this same party. And you look at, you find a cursed idol, and it's this modular choice of, do you break the idol, you lift the curse of the idol, you steal the idol's eyes, right? And also, I think Cameron actually noticed on a previous episode that the cursed idol, the big statue on that card, is the statue from the cover of like the old advanced Dungeons and Dragons, one of the source books. I don't remember
the
which
player's
one.
hand. It's the AD&D player's handbook, and that idol also shows up on the improvised, or a variation on it also shows up on the improvised weapon card, where someone is using it as a club.
Right. I just really love that from the you see a guard coming. It's just this experience of, the DM being like, okay, this is what you see. And then you as the party have to make this choice of like, okay, what are we going to do about this? And translating those onto a modular magic card, it's just such a clean and easy way to do it. And I love that they allowed themselves this very unusual for Magic card naming scheme of this like this strange like addressing the player, and I think it's great.
Something that I observed about these cards as well is that they are almost universally things that happen in Dungeons and Dragons outside of a dungeon, right? So there's, if you think about D&D, you can break down a lot of what happens into social activities, wilderness exploration, and dungeon crawling. And I think that wilderness exploration and social activities thing is not something that lends itself to magic cards nearly as well as dungeon crawling, because so much of dungeon crawling is like fighting. And so this is a very neat way of capturing the sort of role-playing aspect of a role-playing game. And I appreciate that they have their own sort of templating that calls attention to itself and introduces some levity. I think it's really cool as well.
Yeah.
One of the other small things that I just really appreciated for Flavor Wins, it's not specific to a card, but it is the italicized keywording of a specific ability for a card. Like
Yes.
Clever Conjurer has the ability Mage Hand, right? Tap, untap, target, permanent, not named, clever conjurer, activate only as a sorcery. And that appears throughout the set, and I think that's really charming. I like it a lot.
And for clarification, for those who aren't familiar with D&D, what is Mage Hand in D&D?
Mage Hand is the worst spell that's ever been written by anyone ever. Possible exception, Charm Person, but it's like, if you've ever played the board game Diplomacy, and had a friend be like, yeah, if you move your fleet out of Sevastopol this turn, I will let you move the thing, and they lie to you and just take Sevastopol. Mage Hand I feel has sparked roughly, maybe just slightly fewer fistfights between players and DMs than games of Diplomacy, because Mage Hand is a level 1 spell that says, like, you can lift and manipulate a 5-pound object.
I hope you're ready.
Have fun with that description.
I hope you're ready to go to court with your DM about how much things weigh.
Yeah, it's like, well, I use Mage Hand to pick up a torch and use it to attack the troll. No, Kyle, no, you don't. You can't.
I mean, Dale was my dungeon master for many years, and he was the one who first introduced me to the idea that prestidigitation, which is a 0-level Dungeons and Dragons spell that basically is like a hand wavy, like it can do any of the mundane tasks that wizards don't want to have to do all the time, like cleaning, flavoring food, creating small breakable magical items, etc. is the best spell. It's just the best spell. It's the spell that every first level commoner that you encounter, if you give them a choice between like a wand of fireball and a wand of prestidigitation, they'll take the wand of prestidigitation every time because it can do literally everything. Mage Hand kind of falls into that same category where it's like super OP spell for everyone who isn't an adventurer.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, prestidigitation is supposed to be all the little things that you see Gandalf doing, right? Like, I light my pipe. How do you do that? Oh, well, I suppose it's prestidigitation. Yet players still seem to want to take it to trundle into combat with.
Well, that's because that's what we do. That's what we do.
Yeah. You push, keep prestidigitating on my last nerve. See what happens.
I love this aspect too, because it sort of allows them to have a much greater surface area to expose parts of D&D that are cool. Dawnbringer Cleric is similar. It has the like cure wounds, dispel magic, gentle repose. Those are all cleric spells in D&D, and you look at that and it's like, oh, okay, this is a cleric. Can I use this as a jumping off point to something that I thought was maybe a less great flavor?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, beholders in general in this set. I'm not 100% on the beholders in this set.
All right.
So a beholder is a creature. It is a big sphere. It has 10 eye stalks coming out of the top of its head, each of which, true to its name, has an eye on it. And it has one really big eye in the middle. And so the big eye in the middle casts an anti-magic cone. So if the beholder is looking at you, then you can't, none of your magic items work, and you can't cast spells. That's very scary. But then also every turn, the beholder, and I guess for further context, beholders very powerful. They often find themselves in positions of social power, like the heads of thieves guilds or wizard schools and things like that. If you're in a fight with a beholder, tactically, it is a really interesting thing because you're trying to be out of that anti-magic cone that is going to make all your stuff useless. At the same time, it's firing off stuff from its eye stalks. It has these 10 eye stalks, which have a bunch of different abilities. Death rays, there's disintegration, there are all sorts of like crazy different effects that a beholder can randomly toss at you in combat. Charm ray, paralyze ray, fear ray, slow ray, enervation ray, telekinetic ray, sleep ray, petrification ray, disintegration ray, death ray. I may have missed one.
And it's a different ability. It's like a codified, like they have 10 stocks and each of those stocks has these 10 abilities.
There are a few different kinds of beholders. So I think the Death Tyrant, there's a card for that in one of the commander decks as well. And so Death Tyrant has different abilities, but the absolute, in my mind, key thing about the beholder that is missing from the beholder cards is that which eye stalks you get every turn are random. So you never know what it's going to shoot at you any given round. And the GM doesn't know. It's not a tactical decision. It just sort of like beholders are completely insane. They have kind of no control over their powers, and they have this like sort of cool tactical thing that is very difficult to replicate without a minis map. And I would have liked to see, I think the beholders in this set are, kind of powerful and interesting, and you get some of the like anti-magic cone and things like that, but they're not quite as gonzo as a D&D beholder, and I feel like there's some fun left on the table there.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. I do like, I mean, I see why they had to go with the name for the card Eyes of the Beholder, because when are you ever going to get a chance to do that again? But
there was also like a classic D&D, was it a novel? No, there was a game. Yeah, Eye of the Beholder.
But I guess if you're looking at Baleful Beholder that does either the anti-magic cone or the fear ray, yeah, I guess like probably card text was a concern.
I was going to say, like, you can't like, you can wish for things. I just kind of wish there was a die roll involved, like there was some random element. You could imagine them using the saga frame and like creating a giant chart and you roll it, but I don't think they would actually ever really do that.
I don't think they would do this in a normal set, but it'd be amazing if they did something like the unset Garbage Elemental or Knight of the Kitchen Sink, where you have the Baleful Beholder, but there's like, 12 different printings of it that just have 2 randomized abilities.
That would be super amazing. And I mean, I guess that's sort of, when you look at that first beholder, you're like, oh, okay, so I wonder where all the other eye-rays are. Like, are they on different cards? And they're not. But at the same time, it's all, you can't make the whole set beholders. So
Right. And I suppose at some point they need to be just like, well, we have the anti-magic cone and then they have a bunch of other abilities. Yeah. Are those abilities meaningfully different on the Magic the Gathering battlefield? Because they're very granular in D&D, but most of it amounts to kill a creature.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So like maybe we can just consolidate that into some other miscellaneous removal effect.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I think it's the fun of the random dice rolls, and I do appreciate that we have some of that in this set. You have cards like the Deck of Many Things that are just like so gonzo, like you can't imagine putting it in a competitive deck, but it does a whole bunch of weird gonzo stuff that you would not otherwise expect from a Magic card, and it accomplishes it with dice rolls.
I have a couple cards that I thought were slight misfires as well, and I want to get them sort of out of the way in the middle of the podcast along with the beholders. But since you mentioned it, what in D&D is the Deck of Many Things?
Okay, so in Dungeons and Dragons, the Deck of Many Things is a mechanical. It's a mechanic that uses cards in Dungeons and Dragons. A game that normally uses dice uses cards. I know. The Deck of Many Things is a Magic item that I'm intimately familiar with, as are you, I think, after one too many encounters. It's a Magic item where it's a deck of tarot cards. And when you find the deck, or sometimes a non-player character, like a dungeon master character, will present you with the ability to draw from it, but oftentimes you just find it. You somehow find out whether a magic voice tells you in your head or a magic mouth appears on the deck in some editions to tell you that you are able to draw any number of cards from the deck. And you have to choose ahead of time how many you are going to draw. Are you going to draw 3, 5, etc.? You never know. But it doesn't actually tell you what those cards are going to do, just that they can be beneficial or baneful. So you choose, you're like, okay, well, I have one chance, I'm going to draw 3 cards, and you start drawing them, and you start realizing that these cards can do absolutely incredibly powerful things. They can immediately level you up. They can increase your ability scores. They can give you treasure beyond your wildest dreams, or they can make it so that the next time you kill a monster, you get an incredible treasure. But they can also do really awful things. Like a bunch of them more or less instantly kill you. There's like one that says body functions but soul is trapped elsewhere. So yeah, good luck with that one. Or gain the entropy, or basically some sort of powerful extraplanar being, which in Dungeons and Dragons generally means a demon, devil, or angel, becomes very mad at you, is one of them. There are ones that make the next encounter you fight really bad. Deck of Many Things can do all sorts of different things. But and then the classic defeat death or be forever destroyed, which is the Grim Reaper appears in front of you and you have to fight the Grim Reaper by yourself. any of your friends who try to fight the Grim Reaper, of course, doesn't tell you any of these things, gets their own Grim Reaper, and anyone who's killed by the Grim Reaper can't be resurrected. So they're dead forever. So what happens with Deck of Many Things is an arms race. Someone draws from the deck and they draw a few cards and they get something good and nothing super bad happens. And so then everyone wants to draw from the deck. And it always goes for a while until basically everybody is dead. But typically someone will have drawn the card that like lets you wish that a certain event in the past hadn't happened, or lets you just make a wish in general. And they'll wish that the Deck of Many Things had never been discovered, and it will reset the entire thing. And then it's basically everyone had a fun night and drank a bunch and all their characters died, and then they get to reset. That has been always my experience with the Deck of Many Things. And that is why I made an app for it, which is the only app that I have in the App Store. So
yeah, I figured you might want an opportunity to mention it. Yeah. So there's one or two cards that I think, in amongst all the ones that I love, and I'll talk more about those later, there's one or two cards that I thought maybe didn't land quite how I expected them to, or just like differently in a way that sort of doesn't really make sense compared to what I think it could have done in Magic. So one of them is Tasha's Hideous Laughter. So in D&D, Hideous Laughter, it's a first level enchantment spell, a range of 30 feet, concentration up to a minute. A creature of your choice that you can see within range perceives everything as hilariously funny and falls into fits of laughter if the spell affects it. The target must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or fall prone, becoming incapacitated and unable to stand up for the duration. A creature with an intelligence score of 4 or less isn't affected, I guess, because they're too stupid to get the joke. And so they have to, at the end of each of their turns, they can make a wisdom save to throw off the spell, which seems like an ideal situation for some sort of like,
encrust effect.
Yeah, like an encrust, like a blue tap effect that could maybe be shrugged off, like with a dice rolling mechanic. It's like,
it makes me think of the Heliod's Punishment. Is it called Heliod's Punishment from Theros?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the short-term arrest.
Yeah, or even like just like a claustrophobia that you can, every upkeep, you can roll a d20, and if you roll 20, then you get to take it off or something. But instead, it's this weird, very powerful mill card that mills off cards until you exile them. It's not even mill. You exile cards from the top of your library until you exile cards with a total mana value 20 or more. And that's a cool effect. It just, for me, it's like, that's not really, I don't really jive that with Tasha's Hideous Laughter. I guess they're going with like a mind unraveling kind of thing, but
yeah, I saw that and I was like, hilarious. Right? Like, I guess you laugh when you do it to somebody in a limited game, right?
Yeah.
Like
it's
guess,
pretty funny when you first pick Tasha's Hideous Laughter.
I guess it is splashy, and it's like when you have a card that's called Tasha's Hideous Laughter, you need it to be very splashy. Like, I think it's definitely splashier than an encrust, right? But I totally agree that it makes zero sense compared to the source material.
Yeah. And then the other one for me is the Displacer Beast, a classic D&D monster. They resemble sort of like a big panther with like a weird tentacle coming out of their back, or tentacles coming out of their back. So it's like a huge panther with a weird back tentacle. And in Magic, the Displacer Beast, it's a 3/2 for 3. That's totally fine. Enters the battlefield, you venture into the dungeon. That's sure, why not? And then it has the ability Displacement, which is for 3 and a blue. You return it to its owner's hand. So the Displacer Beasts in D&D, they have this innate magical ability to bend light. So they look like they like flicker around, like it's hard to know exactly where they are. Like they're either just there or a couple feet just to the left or right of just there. Yeah, precisely. And so to me, like I don't quite get the dungeon aspect, though I guess they just wanted to have a creature that ventured ETB and bounced. Again, it's like it's a good Magic card, right? Like having a 3/2 that comes in and then you can return it and recast it to keep venturing. Very cool as a Magic card, but like the Displacer Beast, like I don't know, something with I don't know. I don't know if you want more phasing in the set. They already have Blink Dog, but like something, the returning to the hand doesn't really sort of hit me as what the Displacer Beast does.
I think phasing would have been, and like there's also, is it Robe of Stars or Cloak of, I think it's Robe of Stars in the Commander decks that uses phasing to great effect for this. Like Robe of Stars, it's a card in the Commander set that you can equip for 1 onto a creature, and then you can pay a white and 1 to phase it out, and then it'll phase back in. But you can use it to dodge things. And the robe of stars in D&D it actually functions almost exactly the same. You can use an action to move your body to the astral plane, not astral project, like not just your spirit. You move your entire body to the astral plane just for as long as you want to, and then whenever you want, you can take an action to return to the material plane from wherever you left off, but not necessarily whenever. So some time could have passed, and you can't really see what's going on in the material plane at the time, so that can be dangerous. But I think the Robe of Stars is a great flavor implementation. Displacer Beast, I agree with you. It does feel kind of weird to me.
Yeah, like the blurriness. I mean, yeah, I suppose they didn't want too many creatures with ward,
Yeah.
right? But that seems like a ward thing.
Yeah, you also could have seen something like
Proof.
or it could create a double of itself. Like that's in Displacer Beasts in some editions too. The displacement like makes it seem like there's more than one, and so you never know which one you're attacking. So that's another thing that they might have done there. Again, too bad, because the Displacer Beast is such an iconic D&D monster, and like in a small like pantheon of like really iconic D&D monsters that were not stolen from somewhere. I don't think the Displacer Beast was stolen from anywhere, though ironically it was stolen from, because basically for Final Fantasy they kind of just handed a mono the monster manual and we're like, go ahead and do this. So like the curl in Final Fantasy is a Displacer Beast, right? Like it at least physically is a Displacer Beast, and you've got like variations on Mind Flayers and stuff in there too, which are so iconically D&D that Wizards, when they released basically the entire game as like an open source project with 3rd edition, locked down certain of these monsters. And I'm pretty sure Mind Flayer was definitely, and Beholder were definitely in that list of things that were iconic D&D and were not allowed to be reprinted in other books. I think Displacer Beast was in that category as well.
Yeah, I was it the Quirrell? But yeah, in Final Fantasy VII, I remember playing Final Fantasy. No, not the Quirrell. There's I can't remember what they're called, but you meet them at like the very beginning of the game in Final Fantasy VII, and I was like, yo, that looks like a Displacer Beast, because it's just a big panther with tentacles on its back.
Yeah. Definitely Final Fantasy 1 was kind of like, take the monster manual, put it in the video game, and file all the serial numbers off.
Cam, before we get back to some more stuff that we really enjoyed the implementation of, do you have any that you're a little let down by maybe?
I mean, I think the well-trod ground of Power Word Kill as a 2-mana spell
right,
is maybe a little tired, but it's one where I keep looking at it and being like, well, I guess I this is the first time I ever get to cast this. Right?
So yeah, Power Word Kill in D&D is a 9th level enchantment spell. You utter a word of power that can compel one creature you see within range to die instantly. If the creature you choose has 100 hit points or fewer, it dies.
Yeah, and
because we talked earlier about this, what level of wizard do you have to be to take a 9th level spell?
Because it's have your wizard level and round down or round up, right?
Right. So would it be 17? Because you get them at odd levels too, so it's not.
Yeah, it would be.
I love that I can hear you referencing a physical book.
17th level where you get it.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yes, Graham, I'm rapidly flipping to the wizard class right now.
I love it.
Yeah, I've never gotten a character to the level where they could cast Power Word Kill. 10th level approximately seems to, like 7th to like 12th level is the sort of iconic sweet spot of D&D where your characters are really powerful, but the rules are still like manageable enough to scale. Traditionally beyond that, it gets tougher.
Yeah, like I remember in 3.5 they had the book for like above 20th level play, and you would get to things where it's like your base attack roll is plus 60 with a die roll on top of that. You can add 5 or 6 maybe if you roll well, right? Where it really felt like the die rolls started to become vestigial.
Yeah, I think that's another thing 5th edition D&D, slight digression, does really well is by toning down the modifiers on die rolls in a big way. Like they scaled everything down and compressed it. So instead of it like, sort of saying like a +1 bonus is pretty good, but what you really want is the +5 bonus, like a +2 bonus or a +3 bonus in D&D 5th edition is really good. And that lets the game scale up to those higher levels better than previous editions.
Agreed.
So a spell that I consider iconic to D&D that I think the implementation of in terms of how it translates to magic that I think is handled perfectly is the classic, everyone's favorite, magic missile. We've joked about it for years from that Dead Alewives sketch of just, I cast magic missile. And in D&D, it's a first level spell. You create 3 glowing darts of magical force. Each dart hits a creature of your choice that you can see within range. A dart deals 1d4 plus 1 force damage. All darts strike simultaneously, and you can direct them to hit one creature or higher. The whole point of Magic Missile is that it's not particularly strong. 1d4. They're not very strong, but they always hit. Right? That's the thing. Yeah, Magic Missile hits. You go, I cast Magic Missile, and it's like, cool, you do that damage. And so Magic Missile in Magic, 1 red. It can't be countered, and it deals 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. That's perfect.
Yeah, it can't be countered goes a long way toward that flavor too. It's, saying like, this is a reliable spell. It will hit 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm. Of course, some creatures have hexproof and stuff like that, but it gets around ward.
Yeah. That's true. I hadn't thought about that. That's really cool.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that was a thing in Strixhaven because there was a bunch of creatures running around with ward, but there was the heated debate, which can't be countered. And the way that ward is worded is that the spell is countered unless they pay. So you just go, I'm not paying for that ward. And it's like, fine, I counter the spell. Well, my spell can't be countered. Oh, I guess I take damage then.
That's smart.
Yeah.
Suck it, nerds.
Sorry, I got one more grump, which is in the same vein as Power Word Kill. Less known spell, but Planar Ally in Magic.
Yeah.
It's like a 3/3 angel or something.
That's weird.
Like that?
Yeah. So Planar Ally in the set here in Magic, it's 3 white for a 3/3 angel. I think it's actually the only angel in the set that isn't like a token that's generated from the Book of Exalted Deeds. So it's a 3/3 angel with flying. Whenever it attacks, venture into the dungeon.
Okay, so let me read to you. This is a slightly long spell description, but let me read to you what the Planar Ally spell does in Dungeons and Dragons, and you be the judge as to like missed potential here. You beseech an otherworldly entity for aid. The being must be known to you, a god or a primordial, a demon, prince, or some other being of cosmic power. The entity sends a celestial, elemental, or fiend loyal to it to aid you, making the creature appear in an unoccupied space between range, etc., etc. If you know the creature's name, you can speak that name when you cast the spell to request that specific creature, though you might get a different creature anyway, Dungeon Master choice. When the creature appears, it is under no compulsion to behave in any particular way. You can ask the creature to perform a service in exchange for payment, but it isn't obliged to. The requested task could range from simple to complex. You must be able to communicate with the creature to bargain for its services. Payment can take a variety of forms. A celestial may require a sizable donation of gold or magic items to an allied temple, while a fiend might demand a living sacrifice or gift of treasure. Some creatures might exchange their services for a quest undertaken by you. And then there's various formula for calculating what that cost might be. After the creature completes the task, or when the agreed upon duration of service expires, the creature returns to its home plane after reporting back to you, if appropriate, for the task. So basically that's that. So there's so much potential in this spell. You could get an angel, you could get a demon, you could get a powerful elemental. It doesn't have to do what you tell it to. You can bargain with it. You can extract costs from you. This to me sounds like an incredible commander card. It's like Kalia, but it brings in anything that belongs to anyone. It's a Kalia that bounces around the table and does all sorts of... No, it is a 3/3 angel. Yeah, I was a bit sad when I read that. Also, as a digression, I had an amazing campaign at one point where we all played aristocrats, and one of the conceits of the campaign was that we all had a ton of money because we were all aristocrats, and it was basically what we got in exchange, because aristocrat is a non-player character class in 3rd edition, so you miss out on a lot of powerful abilities like fighter stuff and cleric stuff and whatnot. So what we had instead was a lot of money, and there was a plot, a huge adventure spanning, or like multi-adventure spanning plot arc that involved a plague, very appropriate for 2021. And so this plague had to take off in the city and cause all these problems. And as rich people, we saw the plague happening, and so we bought a candle of invocation, which is a magic item it's a candle that you can light to cast one of several spells, one of which is Planar Ally. We cast Planar Ally, summoned an angel, which had the ability to cure disease by touch, and the angel roamed the streets curing the disease. And that was the end of the multi-adventure spanning plague plotline. Of course, in 2021, there would be a bunch of people who were like afraid of the angel and boarded themselves up inside their houses to avoid it, and etc. But yeah, so it's, again, the potential of Planar Ally, it leads to so much fun that is not captured by the card, and that's what I see is missing there.
I think that's reasonable. Can I ask you then to talk about a card that, at least that I think is a great translation of it? We've actually talked about it once before on the podcast, but I know that this beast showed up in a campaign that I played with you, which is the Flumph.
Oh God. So the Flumph, I have a real soft spot for Flumphs. I think that they originally...
They do too.
Yeah, there's soft spots all over. They originally appeared in a book called The Fiend Folio, which is like, I get the sense that at that period of TSR's history, they were just like, they needed to get these advanced books out as quickly as possible, and they sort of like needed material. So they scraped together a bunch of like wacko monsters from Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine, probably maybe a combination of Dungeon and Dragon Magazine, and put them out in a book along with some other ones from other like just weird off the wall sources. And one of the issues with those monsters is that they are like really narrow. Like they don't make particularly good adversaries, a lot of them, or they're monsters that were like made to be sort of puzzle monsters, like puzzle fights in specific contexts, but they're like completely removed from the context that they were in. And this is sort of where the Flumph comes from. It is a big flying jellyfish that tends to be good aligned, and they tend to know a lot about the things that go on around them, but their primary power is that they can like spew out gross smelling goo on you if they don't like you, and they can run away. And there's a line of text in their original description that says if a Flumph is turned upside down, it becomes helpless. So like the Flumph in here, like I don't know, it reasonably captures that flavor, I think.
I mean, what I like also is the Flumph's thing about how they absorb dark energy and share knowledge, right? Which I like from the both players drawing a card thing.
Yeah, and that's where I think the flavor win is, that they share knowledge and everyone wins. If you can convince someone to attack into your Flumph, then their monster encounters the Flumph and some exchange of information takes place, and everyone wins. My favorite, of course, anecdote about Flumphs is that at one point when I was in university, I ran an entire campaign where everyone played as a Flumph. And the purpose of this, I was like, okay, well, here's a monster. We'll have everyone make Flumph characters, and we'll put them in this really high level adventure. So there'll be Flumphs with character levels. So like Flumph cleric and a Flumph fighter and Flumph sorcerer and so on. And they'll all go into this super powerful adventure together. And the thing that was most exciting about it is I was like, well, we'll need miniatures for this because we were playing 3rd edition, and you basically need miniatures for 3rd edition. So I had everyone come over to my house and make the Flumph miniatures out of Fimo, which is a modeling clay that you toast in an oven to harden it. So everyone came over and everyone made their own Flumph with Fimo and googly eyes and stuck it on miniature bases to use for the campaign. I've actually posted a picture.
Oh my God, you have the picture
for you in Slack.
Holy moly.
Oh, so wow.
Hopefully James can insert it into them. They are really a work of art. Like they're beautiful.
These are way better than I thought they would be.
Right?
I mean, wait, that sounded rude.
One of them had a purse.
I remember these guys. I don't know if I actually played in that campaign or if I just saw these figures.
I think
also the Games Workshop slaughter bases. Respect.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Because I just needed a bunch of bases, so I went to GW and picked up because they were right around the corner from where I was. But but yeah, so they are the real tragedy of this campaign, unfortunately, was that the adventure that I was running was one of the sort of like higher level Pathfinder games. Pathfinder was like an offshoot of D&D third edition from after fourth edition came out. Another company called Paizo picked up third edition and continued publishing it under the open license I was talking about earlier. And I had not realized, but the higher level Paizo Pathfinder stuff was just very, very brutal, like brutally hard, because there were so many options at that point and people were creating these like really, really powerful builds. It was assumed if you were playing at a higher level that you were going to mop the floor with whatever monsters. And so I had everyone put these flumps together and we were all so excited about them. And then literally TPK on the first encounter. TPK is total party kill. Total party kill on the first encounter of the adventure. And that was the end of the campaign.
No.
But the flumps live on. You can see them now. And yes, they certainly live on fondly in my own memories.
I only had two other things I wanted to touch on briefly. So Cameron, if you wanted to.
Yeah, no, I only have one other thing that I really wanted to talk about, which was just another very high level thing in this set, which is how do you decide what effect is going to be which color? Right? Because going back to the class cards, Bard is red-green.
Right.
Okay, interesting, right? And I think at some point they were probably like working backwards from the effect that they wanted it to have. Right? What does green do, or what does a bard do? Well, it tells inspiring stories. How do we affect that, or how do we want to translate that? Because what we're doing here, what we're talking about, is the act of translation from one medium to another, even if they are cousins. And they came up with a list of effects that they thought were appropriate to bard, and then I assume they decided what colors, what mana you would need to pay for those effects, which is fine. Like magic missile being red, yeah, I suppose it would be. Right? Like I don't associate wizards with red, but as we just saw, or as we talked about earlier, sorcerers are a red class, right? Which reflects the spontaneity. So I suppose evocation spells can be red.
I like to your comments about Bard. Like, yeah, I mean, I think they really leaned into because Bard is very like legend focused, and they really leaned into the sort of Skald thing, which I found is a slightly odd choice because it's not really something that the D&D Bard really evokes for me, but definitely from like Kaldheim, you had a couple of bards there essentially who were storytellers and musicians and things like that that were very definitely red.
So I don't know. This isn't a hit or miss for me. I think it's interesting where things came down, right? Because like, okay, clerics can be white or black, and that's an established thing in magic, right? Divine magic can probably find homes in either of those colors, right? But other divine spellcasters, druids, right? And they would interact with elemental magic or the magic of living things, right? Which you would find in green. But hold on, like water and air effects, those are in blue, right? Because islands have water. So like I think this, if I had been working on this set, I would probably have lost a lot of sleep over it, right? Just like sat at my desk going like, guys, I don't know. Can lightning bolt be a red spell? Can it be a red spell? Does it make metaphysical sense?
So
right.
This is like such an interesting topic to me because like, and I want to like pull back a little bit and talk about just universes beyond as a concept in general. This is Wizards putting non-magic IP onto magic cards, and the first sort of version of this that we saw was the Walking Dead secret lair, and it seemed to me like their like sort of best way of accomplishing like sort of outside the box for magic flavor wins in that was color pie breaks, where you've got Michonne, who's like an equipment based, I think green, maybe black and green character, which was really strange, right? Like it was a color pie break, but it's not typical for magic, so it stood out. Whereas in the D&D set, it really feels like they sort of expand what they're trying to do with these sort of cross IP crossovers.
For whatever it's worth, technically speaking, Wizards doesn't consider this set part of Universes Beyond.
Yeah, I still feel like this set is kind of a sales pitch to other brands as like this is what we can this is what we did with our own IP. Think of what we could do with yours. And for what it's worth, I think they did a phenomenal job. But yeah, anyway, so they with this they've done a really excellent job of bringing in things that evoke the essence of D&D and create fun mini games and go mechanically outside the boundaries that Magic would normally go. Like a dungeon is like this whole like board based mini game that is kind of well beyond the normal space. Like it's a very parasitic thing. It requires you to have like extra game pieces and things like that, well beyond what they would normally do, and is much more creative than just like a color pie break in order to make this specific character who should probably identify as these colors do these things that they did in the show or the book or whatever. But I think that the color pie breaks, Cam, that you're talking about are something that is going to be unavoidable no matter what. The dragon breaths is also something that I saw here, because here you have like white, black, green, gold dragons, etc., and they all have their various kind of breaths. Well, like the green dragon has poison breath, which is true to D&D, but not particularly true to Magic. Like you would expect poison breath to be black.
Right. The white dragon debuffs things, right? Because white dragons in D&D are cold based.
Yeah, and the blue dragon breathes lightning, and like blue doesn't do lightning. But yeah, I mean they kind of make it work. But and I appreciate that like some of the like mechanically they probably do fit into their colors a little bit better than the sort of pseudo flavor text of the abilities, which also I think is an amazing idea. Maybe evokes.
Right. Because, like, you know, in order for it to not break color pie, you would have to make green dragon a black card, which
Right.
like is a non-starter. It's hilarious, but like clearly you can't you would never do that, especially because this is, well, it does not replace a core set. I think it is supposed to be the on-ramp this year for non-enfranchised players, right? So opening a card called Green Dragon, which is a black card, would be confusing.
I do also appreciate this. I just like kind of noticed this today, but I appreciate that they have the 5 chromatic dragons, or five different chromatic dragons. That's not all the chromatic dragons, but they have 5 chromatic dragons, one for each color in the color pie. And then they have also gold dragon, which is red and white, but its border is gold. Ergo, it is the gold dragon. That's cute.
I enjoyed that. All right, a couple more before we round up, because this is already a long episode, but it turns out we've had a lot to talk about. I just wanted to say how much I love the gelatinous cube. The D&D creature it's just a big old square. It's the joke is that it's the width of a like dungeon corridor, right? Like on a map, it takes up the entire square of a corridor. And I think there's meant to be this idea that you can't even necessarily see it.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on this particular aspect of the gelatinous cube. Go on.
Yeah, but what I like about it is that it's because it swallows people up, right? It's other creatures can enter the space, but creature that does so is subjected to the cube's engulf and has disadvantage on the saving throw. The engulf is it moves the cube can move. It can enter larger or smaller creature spaces. When it does that, the creature has to make a dexterity save. On a successful save, the creature can get pushed back. On a failed save, the cube enters the creature's space and takes acid damage and is engulfed. And when the cube keeps moving, the creature keeps moving with it. And you can try to use strength checks to get out of the cube. And so in Magic, it exiles a creature until it leaves the battlefield. So it's just sort of like an Oblivion Ring kind of effect. It temporarily eats something. If you kill the cube, then you can rescue your friend. They'll fall back out of it, unless you use the second ability, which is dissolve, which you can pay an amount of money to or amount of mana rather, to digest the creature that you've exiled to actually kill it and put it into the opponent's graveyard. And I think that's a terrific translation of what the gelatinous cube does to a Magic card. But it sounds like you might have thoughts.
Oh no, I agree that what is there is good. It's just one of those situations where I just wish the text box could have been twice as long, because I kind of want to see like the gelatinous cube and the pit trap, like the spike pit trap, put together into one card. So it's like a gelatinous cube, but it has flash, because like the part of the fun of the gelatinous cube is that you can't see it, and so you'll like round a corner or like walk down a hall and you'll just happen into one. Or you can have situations where like there's someone got eaten by a gelatinous cube in the past, and their armor is inside it, and so it like flies around the dungeon looking like a ghost, like just a flying animated suit of armor that, whatever the resident kobolds or goblins or whatever can be scared of until the adventurers go to take it on and then figure out it's a gelatinous cube.
Yeah, it's funny because whenever they're represented, even on this magic card, it's the image is a large green cube. Like we've seen that in other representations as well. If you think like, oh yeah, gelatinous cube, big green cube, like a huge thing of lime jello. But mechanically, the cube, like on its like monster entry, it's transparent, and it takes a 15 wisdom check, like a perception check of rolling a d20 and getting better than 15
to actually see it,
to see one that hasn't moved or attacked.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like this is why we had to specify clear and colorless in the laboratory when describing liquids, right? Like, because clear is a quality, but like it doesn't imply colorless. Don't make that mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the gelatinous cube, and I think that's where I'm like, this execution is really good, but I also see the sort of like missed potential that was left on the table, where I'm like, it's one part monster, one part trap. And for the record, I also love the spiked pit trap that you can, like, sometimes when you fall down a pit trap in D&D, you find treasure at the bottom of it. Like, so sometimes you fell down the pit, but there was like an amulet or some gold coins or something down there. And I like that the card does that. And the gelatinous cube has the same thing. Sometimes you'll kill a gelatinous cube and there will be a bunch of like magic items floating in it from the last person that it ate. And so I do almost feel like you could take both cards and merge them together, and you would have like the gelatinous cube card.
I just wanted to talk quickly about spiked pit trap as well, because it amuses me, because like it can hit flying creatures, right? Like it doesn't really function the way you think of a pit trap functioning. But then I just rationalize it to myself by saying, you don't know what's in the spiked pit trap. It could be a mobile anti-aircraft gun. Yeah. Or it could be a missile silo. Right? Those kind of look like spikes.
In Temple of the Lava Bears, Jer had a pit trap on the ceiling because the gravity went weird in a room.
There's actually a story behind that, and that is that prior to us running the Temple of the Lava Bears campaign, which is a limited D&D series that I ran for Loading Ready Run way back in like 6 years ago.
I guess it was retroactively the first Dice Friends.
Yeah, it kind of falls into that canon, sort of, kind of in that. So when I ran that, there had been talk of Temple of the Lava Bears in Commodore Hustle, like 5 or 6 years earlier. And one of the things, and when I was writing those lines for Commodore Hustle, I was intentionally coming up with things that were like ludicrously impossible to execute on in Dungeons and Dragons. And so one of the things that I talked about was a bottomless spiked pit trap. And so when I went to actually write up what the Lava Bears adventure would be when you guys were actually going to play it, I wanted to be true to that material. And so I was left with trying to come up with, how do you execute on a spiked pit trap that is also bottomless? And so the way that I came up with to do it was that you have a pit trap with spikes on the bottom, but then the floor is also a teleportation circle. And when you hit the spikes, you get teleported to the other side of the teleportation circle, which is on the either ceiling if it's a right way up pit, so that you just fall again onto the spikes and then hit the teleportation circle and so on. Or I think I actually reversed the direction so that it was a reverse gravity trap. And so you would just continue falling upwards forever and technically hitting the bottom and then falling again and hitting the bottom and so on.
I love it.
The second digression that I want to take from there is treasure as a theme. I know that a lot of people are kind of like, oh my gosh, there's too much treasure now. There's so much treasure everywhere. Treasure as a theme is really important to Dungeons and Dragons. So I don't assume that this is like the new normal insofar as like treasure generation and things like that. But like literally, treasure used to be, in the earliest versions of Dungeons and Dragons, how you got experience points. Like there was no like, when you kill the monster, you get X experience points and X gold. It was, when you kill the monster, you get X gold, and you also get 1 experience point per gold that you find on your adventure. It was a massive incentive to get treasure, and also kind of an interesting dynamic, because if you were supposed to do a monster fight, but you could figure out like how to steal the monster's gold and not do that fight, you could get a bunch of experience points and level up a bunch more without fighting. which also kind of makes the thief class make a lot more sense in early D&D, which has been sort of changed to the rogue over time because stealing makes a lot less sense. Though the rogue class in the magic version does steal, so it's still kind of there.
I like actually mentioning of the thief class. I like also that there's a bunch of stuff in this set that are sort of the things that the player's handbook suggests are things that a starting level 1 character has, such as thieves' tools or leather armor or the old classic 50 feet of rope.
Yeah. And the torch as well, the Delver's torch. I think this is not the first torch we've seen in D&D. I think there was an Innistrad torch too. Maybe
there was one in Zendikar. Like I think it was just called Blazing Torch.
Blazing torch is the one that I'm thinking of. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that stuff's super cool. And there's like a few like it feels like class specific ones. Like you have a spell component pouch and a wizard spell book. Yeah, I really appreciate those sort of iconic, not even magic items, but just allusions to class gear.
So last thing I want to talk about anyway is another equipment though, which is the Vorpal Sword. So in Magic, single black mana, the equipped creature gets +2/+0 in Death Touch because it's a very nice sword. And it has this ability for 5 black. Until end of turn, Vorpal Sword gains whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. So what in D&D is the Vorpal Sword?
I think it is but I think it depends on edition. I think sometimes it's like a legendary artifact, and sometimes it's just a kind of magic sword.
Oh yeah, I think in 3 or 3.5 it was actually a quality that a DM could add to a weapon.
Right.
But it had a cost of +5 or a magic item equivalence of +5.
Yeah, so that means like if you had a +3 Vorpal sword, your sword would cost as much to buy or create or whatever as a +8 sword, which wouldn't even exist in newer editions of D&D. Too big a modifier. But yeah, so in D&D, a Vorpal sword is like a sword with a significant modifier, like a +2, +3 modifier. That means anytime you make an attack roll with it, you add that much, and anytime you make a damage roll with it, you add that much. But then it also has this other quality, which is whenever you score a critical hit, which is typically when you roll a natural 20. So that's a natural 20 means like 20, you roll a 20 on the die before adding or subtracting anything. So when you roll a natural 20 and get a critical hit, it just beheads whatever it is that you attacked. The head just falls off, and that's the end.
That's assuming the creature has a head. That's actually like a little asterisk on the thing. Is
right.
The creature you're fighting has to have a head, but if it does, then that head's off and that thing is dead.
Yeah, I mean, in most cases, sometimes the creature doesn't care if it loses its head. Like, maybe if you're fighting a skeleton, it doesn't matter because the skeleton's not using the brain. But yeah, it just goes chop, snicker, snack, and the head falls off.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to talk about this is because like just this word in general, because Cam, you and I play Destiny, and in Destiny 2, there's a quality of guns that can be Vorpal weapon. And what does that actually mean in Destiny terms?
Vorpal weapons deal extra damage to boss class enemies and guardians, but only while they are in their super. So that might not mean much to you, but like if you've ever played Overwatch or arena shooters, they typically have like your character will build up abilities and then you get like an ultimate ability. In Destiny, same thing. In PvP, Vorpal weapons will deal extra damage to player characters that are currently using their ultimate super ability.
So the biggest threat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's 10% extra damage to bosses. It might be 20.
And it's almost assuredly that they're using that term from D&D.
Oh, absolutely.
Because like, Vorpal sword, it's a really cool thing. It was like, oh my God, a Vorpal sword. And what I love about this, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because the origins of that word, which is from the Lewis Carroll poem Jabberwocky. Lewis Carroll wrote, I was going to say Alice in Wonderland. Technically, it's Through the Looking Glass and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. But anyway, the story for that, and the Jabberwocky is this nonsense poem about this big evil creature called the Jabberwocky.
Or the
Jabberwock.
Sorry, need to get ahead of the comments on that one.
Yeah. That is beheaded with this sword. It's, like Jared said, it's 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the Vorpal blade went snicker snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. Is the relevant stanza, and that's the origin of the term Vorpal, right? It was like it's the thing that finally took off the Jabberwock's head. So then in D&D they were like, ooh, we should make a Vorpal sword that takes things heads off. So it was, when they put it in D&D, it was a reference to a poem written in 1871 or published in 1871, and that, you know, now is finding its way from there into, you know, Destiny 2 and Magic the Gathering.
You could say that poem was also like a reference to like earlier romances and things like that, because it was kind of trying to prove the point that you could tell a story with a genre. I don't want to say genre because that was not necessarily the exact point, but like you could tell a story with understandable themes and plot with predominantly nonsense words.
And I like also that there's a lot of other words from this poem that are sort of like in general use. Like for one thing, chortle.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a word now. Like, I mean, like I use stuff like burbled and galumphing, and they're from this, but like chortle is in the Oxford English Dictionary as just like a, you know, like a sort of a chuckly snort laugh, and it's from this poem.
Yeah, it's in general, I know I've said it already a couple of times, but the original creators of D&D stole from more or less everything that they could get their hands on. Portable Hole is in this set. I am almost certain that Portable Hole is just a reference to the Beatles movie Yellow Submarine. Like almost 100% sure.
Isn't it just like a Looney Tunes thing?
I mean,
like,
maybe it's a Looney Tunes reference before it was in Yellow Submarine, but like,
right? Like doesn't like Bugs Bunny or like Wile E. Coyote just get like a Acme Labs hole and like throw it on a wall or something?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it could also be like Chuck Jones. That's also possible. Yeah. But like they stole from all over the place. Some of the most obvious ones. Cam mentioned Vancian magic earlier. Like the Dying Earth, the first Dying Earth book, like opens with a wizard going to his spell book, opening up the spell book and choosing which spells he will memorize for that day. One of which is Prismatic Spray, which is just straight up lifted and becomes a D&D spell. There's actually a couple of other ones that are also D&D spells that are like evading me at this point. And then like later on in that same book, someone gets some boots that are very clearly boots of striding and springing. Like the early D&D books, or the earliest Dungeon Master's Guide, had an appendix in it called Appendix N that has been added to other D&D books since then as well. That's like source material that you can draw from when creating adventures and sort of trying to evoke a fantasy world. And I think in many ways, before people knew how to play D&D, like these fiction stories, these novels, these poems, short stories, whatever else, kind of were offered as like, oh, well, you don't know how to play? Well, read these books, and that will tell you what you're trying to do, which I find a really interesting thing about early Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I think that's I just I don't have anything to say. I just love this whole thing. I think this is really, really interesting. With that, we are well over time and we're going to wrap up. We will be back next week, as I mentioned, with Shivam talking about some of the legendary creatures out of the set and sort of their origins. But if there's anything in specific that we missed, but that we didn't touch on, that you would like to know more about, if you're like, look, I don't know anything about D&D, but can you explain what this is about? Let us know. And, you know, maybe we'll do like third episode of this. Who knows? I'm just happy to keep talking about things I enjoy.
This has been so fun. Thank you so much. Like for bringing me on for this. I've had a blast.
Yeah, thank you for being here. For those of you listening at home, a reminder, of course, that this is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Please check out cardkingdom.com/LRR. Let them know we sent you, and they'll give you a little 1-inch button, which I think right now says Big Oof, OUPHE. So until then, I have been Graham with Cameron.
Hello.
Our guest, Jeremy Petter.
Goodbye.
This was edited by Jordan. James was here running the card reader. Heather gets these online, and you all listened to it, and we thank you for that. So until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.